From Flourish DX School, this is the Flourishing at School podcast. With mental health becoming a global priority, we are your partner for creating schools where students, teachers, and school leaders feel good and function well, becoming the best versions of themselves and contributing to a flourishing world.
Welcome to the Flourishing at School podcast. I'm Tamara. Each week, my co-host Jason Van Schie and I bring you the best practitioners, academics, and everything in between in order to inform best practice in whole school mental health. Now, Jason and I have not been able to fix this time zone challenge that we're having with Perth, Vancouver, and all of the other parts of the world. So today, I am going solo with my friend Bill Vining. Welcome to the Flourishing at School podcast, Bill.
It is great to be here. Great to be here.
I'm so glad that you could join. And I usually like to start with the well-being check-in. So I'm going to challenge you today. Think of your well-being just for today. If it was an animal, what animal would your well-being be? Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Oh, my goodness. I hate these, by the way.
Why?
So what would my well-being? I don't know. Mine would be a giraffe. Now go figure that. I have no idea. That's just what came to my mind. That's terrible.
I'm sure there's some deep meaning to your giraffe. I'm going to see your giraffe, Bill, and raise you a sloth because I'm feeling kind of sloth-like. You know how they move so slowly, and yet it's because they're conserving their energy and using it in a very specific way. So I think I'm all sloth, and I love that you just absolutely owned that you hate these. Great beginning. So I have known Bill. We've probably been on committees together for almost 3 years. Wouldn't that be about right, Bill?
3, probably going on 4, yeah.
I would love for you in 5 minutes or less just to introduce yourself to our audience, explaining your career to date.
Okay, I'm 2 weeks away from being 70, and so you're trying to take 70 years and put it in 5 minutes. I got you. So let me tell you, I started my career in education actually by being kicked out of a school, out of a class in college because I questioned the teacher. So you see kind of where where I've gone from there. I actually started as a coach and was a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, edupreneur, which is just I got involved in some startup companies that were really cool when I was living in Nashville, Tennessee, that probably taught me more about business and education than anything that I've been in previous. Then I came back to Arkansas. I grew up in Arkansas, and then we moved to Tennessee, but came back. And when we moved back, I actually started my own school. And it was a school to start with that I thought was going to be the greatest academic school in the county to start with. And we were, in that our SATs were higher than anybody else. Oh, we thought we were doing well. And then I got bit by the high risk kid thing, and so we, in a matter of a couple of years, our whole school changed to at least half, maybe more of. I'm talking ACEs scores of 7 and 8, which are just crazy, and dealing with those kids, and so I fell in love with how to deal with those types of kids, and from there, actually, we thank goodness we got started with social emotional learning and started teaching our kids then social emotional learning about 45 minutes a day. And we noticed that in January, now this was right off the bat before SEL was even a word in Arkansas. Now, I think it was around the country some, but it wasn't much. And we're talking 12, 15 years ago. We noticed in January where the kids just changed. And it's like the whole classroom began to flip in with discipline and everything. And we thought, oh my gosh, we've got something here. And we were just using a little curriculum that we had gotten that had been given to us actually. So we said, well, let's build our own curriculum. And that's when we started building our own curriculum. And about the same time, we went to a positive education um, convention in Fort Worth, is where I think,
It's where we met.
where we met. And and it came back and started working on positive education. We saw positive. I thought, my gosh, where have I missed this in all this in all my life? And to be quick about it, we thought we need a separate curriculum. And Mark, my son, who does the curriculum, began to write the curriculum. We wrote it. We started, but we had trouble implementing. No school had time. They didn't have time for SEL, much less positive psychology or positive education. So anyway, we combined the two curriculums. Then this was over a year's time, and then to make a long story short, I sold the school and got out, and now we have a curriculum that we work with well-being and flourishing as kind of our theme. So was that 5 minutes?
That was brilliant. You took the extended dance mix of the Bill Vining story and turned it into a radio edit. So well done. And there's a couple of threads that I want to connect back. You've got such a breadth and depth of knowledge. What really sticks out to me is how you have continued to contextualize for your Arkansas population. So you and I and my colleague, Dr. Elka Paul, had a conversation one time about some very specific challenges that you shared students in your region were having around drug addiction and this kind of group learned hopelessness, that they didn't see a future, that they didn't see kind of where they were going, which is such a contributing factor. And so one of the things that I love about Bill Vining the man is that he sees that, he takes it in, and then he evolves to solve that problem. And I think you're modeling in real time what a lot of schools miss is that you can't take this off the shelf curriculum and say, okay, now I'm applying it to Arkansas, because Arkansas has this unique circumstance. And of course, there's other places in the world that share that circumstance. But I think the pivot you made was really from, you had this deep interest in regenerative education, and I'm going to ask you about that in a second. But you really have recognized that without starting in a trauma-informed place, the students aren't going to pick up on any of these things. So could you share with me a little bit about what you're doing right now in your trauma-informed programming?
Thank you. And you're exactly right. In education, I think the best way for me to explain this is we have taken the outcome, which we want kids to graduate, we want kids to learn something in school and all, and we totally bypass the kid. So we don't care about the kid, we just want the outcome over here. And by doing that, then you've lost the outcome. And that's what we have found, especially in COVID, that is just opened up all kinds of areas of problems there. But with a child that comes in that is traumatized, the brain is changed, and the brain is continually changing if this trauma is continually coming up. And so, how in the world can a child that's brain is not functioning correctly learn? And so that's where we backed off and said one of the things on well-being is and health in the school is the trauma. So let's come up with something. So in the meantime, Tamara, the interesting thing is we've been dealing with this for about 12 years. And we've been looking at podcasts, we've been looking at all kinds of classes out there on trauma. And there's one thing that's missing, and that is real solutions and practical application in the classroom, which is the way it is in SEL also. But so we noticed that teachers were not coming back to the classroom doing anything. They were just kind of taking their professional development and going, okay, we learned about trauma, now blah blah blah, let's move on, because we've got to get the academics up, and if they don't, then they're going to fire me. So we came up with this 8-hour class, and it's pretty extensive. And the class then is very engaging. It's built for professional development, maybe for in the summer working together, where teachers can work together, and but it's power packed with here's what you can do in your classroom, and that's where we hope to make an impact, so that the millions of kids out there that are severely traumatized, and those that are not traumatized that much. Maybe COVID had an impact on, could be. And I'm sorry for the long answer there, but let me say one more thing there. What we have found is in all of this is that the teachers are going, oh my gosh, this is helping me. And so they are aware of their trauma and doing something about it. So that's where we are right
Yeah.
now.
I I two things that I pick up on that you talked about were the matching that both SEL and when the trauma informed, if it wasn't contextualized for the classroom, it wasn't going to work. That you can take this academic knowledge and all this research, and we know, I mean, I'm part of the Harvard's community of practice. You're always connecting out there to the new research, but we know that the piece that's often missing is, how do I do this in my classroom with a 12-year-old boy who doesn't want to listen? Or how do I do this in my classroom with a 12-year-old boy who does want to listen, but doesn't want to listen in front of his peers? And yet the only opportunity I have to make a difference is in front of this boy's peers. And so I want to first, the other bit that is important to note, because you've talked about traumas for teachers and traumas for students, is just for our audience to really understand that something that could be traumatic for one person isn't necessarily traumatic for another, right? And so this becomes so difficult because it's not an if X, then Y equation. It's not a, if my parents divorce, then this is going to happen. If there's a school shooting, then this is going to happen. It's very different depending on the capacity for each individual, be that a teacher or a student, to process, to move through, or to hold on to those negative thought patterns. And so when I go back to those micro interventions, those micro actions that can happen in a classroom, what does that look like? So what's something that you've seen or tried, Bill, that works really well?
That's actually a great question, because actually there's been research that says that trauma can actually make you stronger, and so it's not like all trauma is bad, because we're all going to be traumatized at some point at some degree. So very very good question there. Um, our objective is for our teachers to understand what trauma is and what's going on. So we deal with the brain, we deal with stress, we deal with ACEs, we deal with um, just the trauma itself and what can happen. On the other hand, we say, here are some of the things that you can do in your classroom, um, and here's some ways that you can notice kids that are in trauma. And so we deal with a lot of those situations, to where now when the teacher goes in, they can at least be aware of what's going on and what's happening, whether the kid's missing school or over in the corner quiet or disruptive. And all of these can be that way. Discipline problems, most of the discipline problems come from some kind of trauma. And so these are things that once they're aware of this, now they can know that this child, it's not necessarily this child, and they're not necessarily in that brain. And what can we do to make that child safe? What can we do to understand? What can we do to be empathetic uh, towards that child, instead of what I did when I first came up and I said, "You get yourself back in that chair and vote." It was like I had no empathy at all with that, and I wished I had. I look back, and that's the regrets that I had in growing up and teaching kids.
I love that you share that, but I also want to highlight something that I've learned, that sometimes the most traumatized student in the class will actually respond better to old school Bill. saying like, sit up and suck it up, because if a student has that very low ACE score, maybe they've got insecure attachment to a parent and they haven't had a stable, reliable adult, and all of the other traumas that are piled on top of that. I heard it described once as the feeling, when your toes are really cold and you put them in the bathtub and it hurts. The first time that someone shows you empathy, compassion, love, it hurts. And so those students, and I think this is what you're saying, there's that really nuanced understanding that teachers have to develop over time, that for some students, acting out could be an indicator that they're seeking attention. For other students, being absolutely quiet and well behaved, and so it is such a nuanced conversation to have. And I think you hit it on the head, that the something that you saw working really well was attuning yourself
Yeah.
to the signals of the students that you have in your class. And it's a work in progress, right? As you said, you used to do it differently. You have a more nuanced understanding now. And I think that's that mindset, right? The open-minded,
Tamara,
non-judgmental, curious.
I'm sorry, go ahead. The kids that were the toughest and that I was the toughest on are the closest that I have now. And some of them I need to apologize to this person, but it's like there was just, it was what they needed at that point in time. And that was maybe a signal of love and caring, which they necessarily weren't getting at home. But I think too, to bring all this to a point, we found that, well, let me say this. When I was growing up, we were told, especially as teachers and coaches, do not build relationships with your kids. I mean, it was specific, and I don't know if they were worried more for, getting involved, sexually or whatever.
Male to female relationships back in the day, because we all have that story, right? From our generation. And this is I was telling my son a story about a girl I knew who I was in class with, who got pregnant by a teacher, and they married and they're still together. And I had a teacher who wanted to date me, and that was a blurred line back then. So things have changed, right?
I know, and you just think, wow. But yes, those are things that I guess that they were trying to push away from. But the fact is, we just kind of kept a total screen of didn't get to know the kids very much, and didn't do, and but those kids that I got to know better, we had a state championship team on basketball one year, and got to know those kids really well, and I have a great relationship with them, and because it was a relationship that we started back then. So I think the relationship part of this is crucial, that you get to know those children, and there are things inside the classroom that we talk about in our program that you can do to do that are good to get to know all your kids better.
Do you have an example of one that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, one thing that we did at our school that was just unbelievable is the circle, to where the kids are all in a circle, and you have a discussion about something in that circle. And we had very specific rules, very specific uh, um, things that the kids could not say in circle. But the amount of sharing that they began to do, and honestly, for a lot of kids, there's nothing else out there where they were sharing. I mean, they're not sharing with their parents. They're not sharing with even their friends, some of the things that they were sharing in circle. And so you get to know them. You get to know what they did over the weekend. You get to know a little bit about them. You see them in a totally different light. And so if anybody's interested, we could give them some tips on that and how to do that. And maybe I can work with you. But that was a fantastic way to do that. We also add into our curriculum in the class, we added SEL. So we've got a lot of SEL solutions that a person can use in their classroom in the trauma class.
I love those suggestions because they're concrete and they're simple. And so, given your extensive experience that I'm sure you've also learned a lesson from something that you tried that was an absolute fail. So, would you share with our audience a lesson you learned from something you tried and it just didn't work? It might be something you tried or something you saw tried in the classroom, but let's help somebody else avoid the same problem.
I think the illustration that I gave earlier, where my focus was academics, and it was probably from arrogance. Here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, be the administrator of a school that had the best students in it, and it went to college and did well. Um, and and there were some events that happened that made us that opened my eyes, you might say. But that is one of the things that, as I look back, and the other thing is kind of what we've said, is that I did not build relationships with my kids as we were growing, as I was teaching. It, in the school that I had, I did more than what I did with others, where I was a superintendent, the principal. As a principal, I did not build relationships with my teachers, and really regret that. Regret that. I wished I'd have had a mentor, something to say, look, this is something that you can do. I was very good at increasing the population of the school, the enrollment of the school. I was very good at raising academic stuff and all that kind of stuff. But then I left my teachers out, and it was a major mistake.
Love your vulnerability in sharing that. And I think it's such an interesting journey, that the journey from teacher to school leader to district leader. And you touched on these different metrics, right? That you've gone from my test scores are important, or my number of disciplinary actions are important, to now I'm thinking differently. And I think that the lesson that I heard there is to consider all of these working
Yeah.
pieces. So again, it's going back to that community. Who else is in this community of education? So you've got the students and the parents, you've got the school they're moving to next, you've got the jobs they're moving to next, and the wife they're going to marry someday, or the children they're going to parent. And so really, I think this dovetails this very nicely into something I know you're passionate about, and I'd love to just talk about briefly, is regenerative education. Could you just talk a little bit about that, considering that some people in our audience may never have heard of this concept, and give us a high level overview?
Let me give you a kind of an illustration to start with. I mountain bike, and at my age, you don't want to fall, okay? Because it takes a little bit longer to get over it than it does when you're 12 or 13. But I love it. I'm out in the woods. I'm in the mountains. I bought me an electric bike, which means I can get help a little bit when I need it. And but the thing is, as I'm biking through the trails, I'm only looking about 8 feet in front of me. So I don't see the deer. I don't see a lot of the mountains unless I stop or unless I'm going slow. And what's happened in education is you've got administrators, for the most part, that are so focused 8 feet in front of their bike or in front of themselves. They don't see the big picture. They don't see what's going on around them. They don't see the wholeness, which you were talking about. You don't see the community. You don't see the kids and where they're going and what they're doing. All I can see is here's what I've got 8 feet in front of me, which means I'm more of an administrator than a leader. And what I would like to see, and what we're trying to do with regeneration, is to say it's everybody working together. It's everybody working together, and it's everybody working together on decision making, on what they learn. I will tell you another story. When I got started in education with my own school, I had a really wise man. He was about 80 years old at the time, and of course, that was pretty old. It was 20 years ago when I kind of started this, and um, I was 50, so that was a lot older than myself. But anyway, he said, I want you to go visit this school. So I drove about 6, 8 hours in Kentucky and watched the school. I went in, and the guy that was leading the school said, "Let me show you around." And I thought, okay. And so he went. He opened the door of one place, and the teacher was excited. The kids were excited, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is education. This is what it ought to be. They were engaged. They were working. He opened another door. They were all engaged. And I thought, what in the world are you doing? He said, 2 years ago, I told them there would be no curriculum and that they'd have to devise their own. He said we had several leave. We had several get mad. We had the parents rebel. But he said after they started doing this, it became their own. It became them. It became something that they created. And it wasn't something that was forced upon them by the State Department or someone else. And I saw that the teachers' buy-in at that point in time. And I saw the teachers were different, and they loved coming to school and do it. We don't have that right now, Tamara. I know, and we're not unique in Arkansas in that. There's a lot of that going on to where every day, every minute of the day that they got. So to answer your question, you back off and you say, what does regenerative have to do with this? If you look at regeneration, we work regeneration from what we call living systems. So if you look at our body, you look at life, you look at living systems as an ecosystem, nature, all these things. If you look at that and you say, well, how does nature keep going for years and years and years? And so the regeneration idea and thought came from regenerating crops and regenerating grasslands around that have just been destroyed because of a lot of different kinds of things. And I won't necessarily go into that, but it went from the grasslands and the crops to regenerating businesses. And now what I've done is started in the regeneration of education. So how can you take living system principles and implement them in education? And I'm doing some consulting, and it is totally amazing to see the principles that I'm working with understand this isn't about them. It's not about them telling the teacher what to do. It's about making decisions together. And the transformation of those teachers and the relationships has been phenomenal. And that's really what we need in education. Too much top down, running by machines instead of like a living system. I'm sorry, that may have been way too.
No, that was a beautiful answer. And I think if we have a theme, I always think, okay, what's the one word theme of this podcast? And so far it's been relationships, right? And the importance that they play, because they underpin the mutual trust and respect. When you know that someone cares deeply, then it's much more comfortable to challenge them greatly. So I think that was a beautiful answer. And we've talked about having a whole other episode because there's so much that we can go into. And so thank you for keeping it to the high level overview. I want to ask you, we're called the Flourishing at School podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, in the work you do, how would you know if you went into a school that you were working with and it was a flourishing school? What would be the indicator?
Oh, that's a great question. There's not many that I go in that I can say this school is flourishing. Okay, and so that's a sad thing. But I think one of the things, the excitement that I shared a while ago of the teachers, the excitement of the students, you could see it on their face. I mean, you cannot hide flourishing, right? And so as we use the word flourishing, in fact, it's kind of interesting. I'll tell you this real quick, that we actually kind of came back away from regeneration because nobody knew what that was. And it just kind of was like, okay, blah, 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 who cares about that? So we use the word flourishing a lot. And I don't like you for for coming up with the name for your podcast, because that's what I wanted to use. But anyway,
Great minds think alike.
I congratulate. So, but Anyway, you can tell with that, but again, you can tell with the relationship. You can see that relationship that principal has with the teachers, and you can see the relationship that they have. I go into several schools, and when I'm driving up to the school, I say, where's the superintendent the office? And well, I don't know. I said, what's your superintendent's name? I don't know. I mean, you would not believe how many do not have a clue. And this is to the students, not necessarily to the teachers. And so you think, okay, do I have a leader here, or do I have somebody that sits behind a desk all day and just does paperwork and does kinds of things? And I'm thinking, how sad it is that we've come to that point to where we think we have to run this operation by a machine. And you can tell very distinctly whether they're running by a machine or whether they're running kind of like living systems where they're working together.
Well said, Bill. Really well said. So we're just about at the end of our time together. And because we're a podcast and you and I have both talked about sources of learning and taking on new information and adapting, I'd love it if you could share with our listeners either some of your favorite podcasts or books. Who are the people you're reading, watching, listening to who are inspiring your thinking right now?
Okay, so this could be controversial, right? Especially in Canada here, where a lot of people are listening. But I like. Oh me, I forgot his name. Just a minute. You're the philosopher that's in Canada. That's
Is it Jordan Peterson?
Yes, Jordan Peterson. Thank
How
you.
did I know? You could just read your mind. Jordan Peterson is coming to Victoria, where I live, and my son just said to me, "Mom, will you get me Jordan Peterson tickets?" And so it's so funny that you thought that maybe that wouldn't be a popular answer. But tell me what you love about Jordan's work.
I think he's just very provocative. He looks at things the way I think a little bit different. It's like positive psychology. You look at positive psychology versus regular psychology, and you go, oh, "My gosh, this makes sense." Regular psychology is 20 years behind the times, at least. And I think that he, in his thinking, um, is just good for me to listen to, just to begin to think out of the box a little bit. I listened to a guy, Paul White, who is a spiritual leader for me, and he pretty much goes against the traditional religion and says this is spirituality. So I think of myself more of being a spiritual person, not a religious person. And so Paul White has been awesome for me. I read a book, or there's a book that I've just read lately. That's just really a short, quick book. It's called The Four Agreements.
Oh, I love that book. Yeah.
Yes, and they've got a fifth agreement out now. But I think if those agreements were adopted by schools and just the basics of them, then I think it would change a lot. It's actually, we're adding some to our curriculum that have something to do with the Four Agreements by Don Ruiz. And then the last one I think would be interesting for your readers is Carol Sanford is really involved in the regenerative movement, and she's pretty tough. But says it like it is. She's got two books that I think would be fun for people. One is called Indirect Work. Have you read that? You haven't read that?
I have not.
Okay. And the other one is No More Feedback. Very provocative, saying we listen to feedback too many times, and she lays out a case where it's pretty interesting to say we lose a lot of ourselves when all we're doing is looking for feedback. So anyway, so it's a lot not to that. Time? Are we out?
We're never out of time. We have so much time. But I want to tell you, you started this by saying that you and I are outside the box, and all of your suggestions were original. So number one, applause to you for not suggesting the same resources that everybody is looking at, and get some really meaty ones. I think we've had a great time. I love this conversation. I'm absolutely going to have you and Mark come back on another episode to talk about regenerative education and to hear more about how it's going with your trauma-informed coursework. So, is there anything else that you wanted to mention that I didn't ask you about before I close this baby out?
Yes, and I want to thank you for what you're doing, and I want to thank you for your dedication to kids. And that's what we need, is more leaders that are dedicated to kids instead of dedicated to maybe the job or dedicated to something else. So I just I want to say thank you for that, and even doing what you're doing with these podcasts and all. I listened to several podcasts, and I didn't use you as one of the examples, but I do listen to you a lot, and learn a lot from you. So thank you very much.
You, that just absolutely warmed my heart. What a beautiful, beautiful way to end. So that is the end of this episode of the Flourishing at School podcast. Many people are listening to us, and you can listen to all our episodes wherever you find your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. So if you want to see Bill and I and our beautiful backgrounds, you can find us on Flourish DX's YouTube channel. And then Jason and I are always on LinkedIn, open to conversations. Bill, you're there too. I find you. Can we invite our audience to connect with you and HeartBridge on LinkedIn?
Yes, and I apologize, but I've got like 3 different LinkedIns, and I'm consolidating those and getting all that. I tell you, I hate that kind of thing personally. So I've got somebody that's going to try to help me. But yes, you can. And I think I left the link in somewhere that you've got.
Yeah, we've got that link, and we'll share it out. So until our next episode, thanks for listening, and keep flourishing at school and in life.
You've been listening to the Flourishing at School podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on whole school mental health, follow Flourish DX School on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Flourishing at School podcast at www.flourishingatschool.com.